"You need a home, and I need a mother," said the little girl to the mail-order bride left. The wind on the ridge carried the smell of dust and far-off rain, the kind that teased the land but rarely blessed it. The auction yard was a scatter of wagons and boots, a restless tide of men shifting from one deal to the next. Rough boards served as a stage for whatever livestock or human misfortune might be sold that day, and it was there she stood, skirt hem trailing in dirt, hands folded in front of her as if holding herself together. Her journey had been long, her ticket bought with the promise of marriage to a man who should have been waiting here. But he was not, and the murmurs from the crowd were starting to change in tone. The sun was lowering, gold light catching the streaks of dust in the air, when a small figure stepped out from behind the wheel of a supply wagon. A girl of no more than 7, dress faded to an indeterminate shade between cream and gray, hair loose and wind-blown, doll pressed under her arm as if it were the last thing in the world she could trust. She looked straight up at the woman on the platform, her gaze steady in a way most grown men lacked. Her voice was soft, yet it cut through the din, carrying something more than just the words themselves. "You need a home, and I need a mommy." It took the woman a heartbeat too long to realize the child was speaking to her. Some of the men nearby chuckled, some turned away, uninterested. Only one man in the crowd shifted his weight and looked toward the girl, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a hat low enough to shadow most of his face. His coat had the wear of years, dust pressed into the seams. His hands were calloused, one resting on the weathered curve of his belt. He said nothing, just took in the child, then the woman, with the kind of patience that could feel like judgment or mercy depending on who was looking back. A commotion on the far side of the crowd drew attention. A man stumbling forward, smelling of whiskey even from a distance, eyes red-rimmed and unfocused. His boots scuffed the boards as he hauled himself onto the edge of the platform, leaning on the auctioneer's stand with a grin that had no warmth in it. His voice was loud, slurred, cutting across the yard like a blunt blade. "This here's my girl. Says she needs a mommy? Hell, I'll sell her to anyone with 2 coins to rub together." Laughter rose from some corners, disgust from others. The child did not move, her gaze still fixed on the woman. The drunkard swayed, looking from one face to the next, waiting for a bite. The auctioneer, perhaps unwilling to let spectacle slip away, gave the man space. It wasn't the first time human dignity had been traded here. The tall man moved then. He stepped forward with the slow certainty of someone who'd already decided his next action before his boots touched the dirt. He didn't look at the drunkard when he spoke, his voice level and quiet enough to make others lean in. "How much?" The drunkard blinked, surprised, then grinned wider. "Cheap for you, Carter. Ain't no one else fool enough to buy her." He named a figure so small it seemed more insult than price. The tall man, Eli Carter, the name rippling through the crowd now, reached into his coat, pulled out the coins, and pressed them into the drunkard's palm. The girl stepped to his side without hesitation, pressing herself close to his leg. The drunkard counted his coins as though they might grow in number if he stared hard enough, then glanced at the woman still on the platform. "Might as well take her too," he sneered, nodding toward her. "Ain't like the man she came for's gonna show. You can have her for near nothing." The auctioneer raised his brows, scenting another sale, but Eli didn't move for a moment. His gaze went from the girl at his side to the woman on the platform. She was watching him without blinking, eyes guarded but with something else beneath, a kind of bone-deep weariness that made her seem older than she was. The crowd waited, sensing the moment. Eli gave the figure the auctioneer wanted, low enough to close it quickly. The gavel fell with a hollow thud. By the time they left town, the light had thinned to a pale wash. Eli's wagon was plain, the boards bleached from sun and years. He lifted the girl onto the bench first, then turned to the woman, offering his hand without looking at her directly. She hesitated only a breath before taking it. His grip was firm but not rough, and once she was seated, he climbed in and took the reins. The horse started forward with a slow pull, the wheels creaking over the packed dirt road. Behind them, the auction yard faded into the heat-hazed distance. Neither adult spoke, and the girl sat between them, her doll on her lap, eyes darting between the two. The air held the scent of dry grass and far-off rain. Miles passed under the steady rhythm of hooves. The land opened up, scattered with mesquite and the dark shapes of cattle moving in the distance. The sun was dropping fast, painting the sky in streaks of rose and violet. The woman kept her hands folded in her lap, staring ahead. She had no clear picture of what awaited her at this man's home, only the knowledge that she had been chosen, not for love, not even for want, but because a child had spoken a need aloud in a place where such needs were usually swallowed whole. The road bent along a ridge, the wind stronger here, tugging at hair and hat brims. The girl leaned against the woman's arm without asking permission, a small, wordless claim. The woman looked down at her, then at the man guiding the wagon. His jaw was set, eyes on the horizon. Somewhere ahead, land and work and a life of some kind waited. Whether it was a better life, she could not yet say. But for the first time since stepping off the train, she felt the faintest thread of something that might become hope, if it wasn't cut too soon. The ridge dropped into a valley, and the road narrowed. Shadows lengthened across the grass. The wagon rattled on, carrying 3 souls bound together now by the simplest of bargains, and by the unspoken truth that none of them had anywhere else to go. The valley lay in a stillness that seemed almost deliberate, the kind that made every creak of the wagon wheels sound louder than it should. Eli drove without hurry, his eyes sweeping the road ahead, shoulders broad beneath the worn fabric of his coat. Beside him, the woman sat straight-backed, her hands resting loosely in her lap, gaze set far ahead as though the land itself might reveal the shape of her future. The girl, Lottie, leaned first against one, then the other, quiet as she studied their faces in turn. By the time the wagon reached the low rise where Eli's ranch came into view, the sky had shifted. Clouds moved in with the slow certainty of a hand drawing curtain. The house stood on a gentle slope, boards silvered with age, its roofline leaning slightly from years of wind. A corral lay to the side, half the fence standing, the rest in need of repair. Beyond, the fields ran until they met the tree-line. No other home was in sight, only the sweep of the land and the coming shadow of weather. Eli slowed the horse, bringing the wagon to a stop near the porch. He stepped down, boots crunching on dry earth, then lifted Lottie to the ground before offering a hand to the woman. She took it without comment, her fingers cool in his. The porch boards groaned under their weight. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dust and old wood smoke, as though the place had been waiting for someone to stir it. He gestured to a narrow hallway with 2 doors. The smaller room, plainly meant for a child, had a single bed and a blanket folded at the foot. The other room, sparsely furnished with a narrow bed and a washstand, was hers. She traced her fingertips along the edge of the quilt, noting how the colors had faded to muted earth tones. Eli's voice came from behind her, low and even. "You can settle in. Supper's in an hour." The first days passed without more than a handful of words exchanged. Eli rose before dawn, leaving the house in the gray light, and returned at dusk, carrying the day's labor in the slump of his shoulders. The woman, her name, she told him once, was Claire, kept to the kitchen and the mending pile. She found work where she could, scrubbing the table until the grain shone, sweeping out the corners, setting small order to a place long accustomed to a single man's indifference to such things. Lottie followed her at first silent, but slowly began to drift toward the corral or the porch where she would sit with her doll and watch the road. The girl's silence was peculiar. She flinched when the wind slammed a shutter, yet sometimes turned her head before footsteps could be felt through the floor. Once, as Claire worked by lamplight, she caught the girl humming under her breath, the sound so faint it might have been imagined. When Claire looked up, the girl's lips were still, her eyes wide and unblinking. One afternoon, the clouds thickened and the air pressed down heavy. Eli came in early, the brim of his hat dripping from the first touches of rain. "Storm's coming fast," he said, setting his gloves on the table. "Secure what you can outside." Claire stepped to the porch, feeling the wind change from a restless whisper to a constant push. She broadened the wash, latched the shutters, and lit the lamps as the sky deepened to an unnatural green-gray. By nightfall, the rain struck in hard, slanting sheets. Wind rattled the eaves, and the house seemed to settle deeper into its foundation, bracing against the weight of the storm. Lottie sat cross-legged on the floor near the hearth, her doll clutched tight. Claire busied herself with the kettle, though her eyes kept flicking to the windows where water streamed in silver lines. Eli checked the door latch, then stood with one hand resting on the frame, watching the storm as if gauging its temper. When the lightning came, it split the dark in a fierce white glare, followed almost instantly by the crack of thunder. Lottie flinched hard, pressing her hands to her ears, her body curling in on itself. Claire knelt beside her, speaking softly, though the wind nearly swallowed her words. "It's just noise, sweetheart." Just noise. But the girl's eyes squeezed shut, and Claire saw her mouth moving, not in a cry, but in words she couldn't quite hear. The next flash lit the room again, and Claire saw the truth in the way Lottie's shoulders tightened a moment before the thunder came. She wasn't deaf at all. She heard. Maybe not every sound, but enough. Enough to have kept this secret pressed close to her ribs, where no one could take it. When the storm eased toward midnight, the rain turning steady instead of furious, Eli banked the fire and stood by the hearth. Claire lingered in the kitchen, turning the realization over and over in her mind. In the girl's guarded eyes, she saw not deceit but survival, the kind of hiding a child learned when the world taught them that silence could keep them safe. In the days that followed, the air between the three shifted, almost imperceptibly. Claire began to hum when she worked, just loud enough for Lottie to hear, if she wished to. Sometimes the girl would pause, tilt her head, and for the briefest moment, her lips would shape the ghost of a smile. Eli noticed these moments but said nothing. The work of the ranch went on. Fences needed mending, and Eli took to spending the afternoons repairing the corral. Claire brought water when the sun was high, her skirt brushing the dry grass. He would nod in thanks, the brim of his hat shadowing his eyes, and she would return to the house without lingering. Words between them were rare, but carried weight when they came. One evening, he found the tear in his shirt mended, the stitches neat and precise. The next morning, she found a tin cup of wildflowers left on the step outside her door. It was in the small town, a week later, that trouble's shape began to form. Eli had gone to collect supplies, Claire riding along in the wagon. The storm had left the land fresh-washed, but the streets were muddy, the smell of wet earth thick in the air. As Eli loaded the last sack of feed, a ranch hand approached him, speaking low. Claire, a few steps away, caught only fragments, the words "saw him," and "near your land," but the way Eli's jaw tightened was answer enough. When they left town, Eli's eyes stayed on the road, his hands steady on the reins. Claire waited until they were past the ridge before she spoke. Was it her father? Eli didn't glance her way. Likely. Heard he's been running whiskey through the hills. Might have been passing by. But the weight in his tone told her it was more than passing by. That night, the wind rose again, though no storm followed. The sound through the grass was a constant hiss. Eli checked the latch on the door twice, his rifle leaning within reach. Lottie sat close to the fire, eyes reflecting the flames. Claire moved quietly about the kitchen, the knot in her stomach tightening. She had thought the worst was behind her when she left the auction yard. Now she saw that sometimes the worst did not chase you. It waited ahead, patient as a hunter in tall grass. In the dim hours before dawn, she rose to find Eli already awake, standing by the window, the pale line of the horizon just beginning to show. He didn't turn when she came to stand beside him. His voice was low. "If he comes here, I'll deal with it." She studied his profile, the steady line of his mouth, the way his eyes seemed fixed on a point far beyond the land he owned. "You don't even know me," she said. "Why would you stand in the way of whatever trouble is following me?" His gaze didn't waver. "Because it's not just yours anymore." The sun lifted slowly over the ridge, spilling light into the valley, and for a moment the house felt less like a place they were passing through and more like a place they might stay. But the wind still carried that restless whisper, a reminder that whatever was coming had not been turned away yet. If you love heartfelt Wild West tales like this, saddle up and subscribe so you never miss the next story by the fire.